the OutSystems platform automatically validates if the user filled in the data and if it is compatible with the data type of the variable that stores it. In this lesson, we will see how we can implement our own input validation. So before we save anything to the database, we can validate if the data is correct according to some business logic. We already seen that the platform does the validation for mandatory attributes and for data type. But for instance, if we want to validate that the stock is greater or equal than 0, then we can add our own custom validations. So here in the save action, what we want to do is actually to create here some logic that validates if the quantity in stock that the user filled in is actually greater or equal than 0. And we will do this again with an if. And here in the condition, let me double click, set the condition. I want to validate if the quantity in stock is greater or equal than 0. And if it is, then I want to continue. If it is not, so here on the false side of this if, I want to set a couple of properties in my input. And this means that, let me select here the variable. I want to set here in the widgets, you'll find here the input for the quantity in stock, and we have here a couple of properties. The input valid and validation message properties allows us to invalidate an input and add a message explaining the reason to the user. So here, this valid property, this is a Boolean variable, and if we set it to false, this means that this input will no longer be valid, and this will have effect also on the form valid property that we are checking here next in the flow. So we set this to false, and we provide a validation message which will be shown to the end user next to the input, as you've seen for the mandatory attributes. So here, for instance, let's say that stock needs to be greater or equal than 0. And if our validation is correct, so if our quantity in stock is greater or equal than 0, then we can continue to test if the form is valid. Okay, so let's add here a breakpoint, and let's start the debugger, and let's publish these changes for us to test in the application. Okay, let's edit the USB camera that we created in the previous lesson. And let's say that the quantity in stock is -5. Let's save, and we're stopped in the breakpoint, and you'll notice here that the quantity in stock is -5. So this means that we're going to set the valid and the validation message properties of that input. Take notice that it is now a valid input. It will become, and it is a valid input because it validates according to the mandatory property and data type. And we are now going to set these to false based on our logic here. So let me just step into, and the valid becomes false. Step into again, we have a validation message. Now, we step over, and you'll notice that the form valid property is no longer true, it's false. It means that we will stay on the page and we will see the message that we just typed in the development environment. Let's go back to the development environment, and let's validate that this price here also needs to be positive. It needs to be greater than 0 actually. So again, to do this, we'll add here another validation. Let me just get here some space. and I want to validate that the price, so here the price is bigger than 0. If it is bigger than 0, let's swap the connectors. If it is bigger than 0, then we will continue to test if the form is valid or not. If it is not, I want to assign here again the valid and validation message properties of that input. So here, in the widgets, we'll find the price input and set the valid property to false and set the validation message to price must be greater than 0. And we're done, and connect this to the next element in the logic. And I want to make here only one final change. If we display all errors at once, we will save our users some time and frustration, so it's better than presenting a single error at a time. This means that here I will need to reconnect this flow into this validation. Okay, so let's publish and test this validation. Okay, so again, go back to our USB camera, and let's say now that the price is -1 and the quantity is -1, and let's remove here the USB camera. So all these inputs will make my form invalid. Try to save it, and let's see that we're setting the quantity in stock as invalid. Let's add a breakpoint. Continue to here. We're setting the product price as invalid, and let's continue. This will all show on our form stating that the USB camera, which is $10 and has 5 elements in stock, now this needs to be fixed for our form to be valid. So now we can save this data. Let me just continue here. And there we have it. That's it.